Assalamualaikum, sir. So today in PIDE COVID-19 War, we have Dr. Umair Riaz with us. He is assistant professor at LUMS, and his area of interest is informal economy. As we know, the COVID-19 is affecting everything. The IMF has declared that there is going to be a great recession in the coming years, and it is going to take some time to get back on everybody's feet in all the countries. And definitely, it is going to have major effects on the informal economy. The people, because of whom the Prime Minister is a bit reluctant to have a lockdown, so they can earn some of their living and giving relief packages. So, sir, how do you think, what are the effects of COVID-19 on informal economy? How do you see it?
Thank you, Fizzah. So I think there are a couple of things that are most salient for the informal economy. The first thing is we need to lay out where exactly does most of the informal sector in Pakistan actually lie. So if you other sort of national data sets, what you will see is that most of the informal economy is concentrated in two particular areas. The first is distributive services. So these include services such as transportation, storage, and retail and wholesale trade, as well as some aspects of the construction industry. And then on the other hand, you also have small and medium enterprises, which are very small scale. Some of them are micro enterprises, and they mostly cater to larger formal sector firms as vendors or clients and so on and so forth. So yeah, there are these sort of two or three major areas in which the informal economy is concentrated. Apart from that, you also have a lot of labor that is informally employed. This includes everything from domestic help to personal and community services, people who work at service sector establishments such as barber shops or motor workshops and so on and so forth. So in total, we're looking at about 65 to 70% of the labor force in this country. The total labor force is about 70 million people. So uska 65 to 70% it's employed somewhere in the informal sector. And within the overall economic activity of the country, we're looking at, just in the urban economy, if you exclude agriculture, we're looking at anywhere from between 30 to 40 to 50% of overall productive activity in the country. Now, there are multiple effects that this virus and COVID-19 is going to have on these various sectors. Now, first is obviously the measures that the government has taken, and these are drastic measures, and these measures were required, which was to induce social distancing by locking down Pakistan's major cities and ensuring that people stay at home. Now, that has a direct implication especially for businesses and firms and entrepreneurs who are associated with things like retail, wholesale trade, who are associated with transportation, for example, who are associated with other service sector enterprises, as well as those entrepreneurs who run small manufacturing units, which were catering to larger industry. So this lockdown effect has sort of significant impact on all of these particular sectors of the economy. The second wave of impact is going to happen with the overall economic slowdown, which is going to contract wages, which will reduce overall demand in the economy. People will obviously not have as much money to spend, and people will take a hit on as far as their incomes are concerned, which means both people who are employed or are entrepreneurs within the informal sector, as well as who the informal sector is catering to. In both instances, you will have you will have implications in terms of people's purchasing power, in terms of their buying power. So collectively, what we're essentially looking at is this combined effect of economic slowdown, which in many cases is going to hit the informal economy, and be shielded from the impact that the formal economy is also going to be experiencing. So it compounds the impact, over a longer period of time.
Okay, so what do you think? How can we mitigate the risk? How can we reduce the severity of it? And how much time we require to, get back on something to, benefit them and to somehow save this sector of economy?
I think the thinking around the response so far has been, in some areas, it's been very good. So, for example, providing direct cash support to the laboring class in particular, so daily wage workers, people who were already be categorized as vulnerable, who were beneficiaries of the PISP or the SR Kafalat program. So I think that is one way in which you can directly reach the most vulnerable segments, many of whom are associated with the informal economy in general. So these include obviously people, I give you a very small example of someone who works as a helper at a retail establishment in a city in Pakistan, right? They will obviously be laid off the minute they don't get as many customers. The laborers are the first ones to be shown the door. Now, BISP related type intervention can actually provide some sort of safety net for these workers. The other intervention on which the government has not had very clear thinking is how do you support the different businesses that are part of the small transporters? How do you support people who work in storage services, for example, right? So far, the government's response to the business community has largely focused on interventions that provide them with cheaper credit, that provide them with refinancing options, that provide tax refunds to exporters. Now, all of these measures are important in stabilizing the economy, but we have to understand that they only cater to a small section of the economy. Most of the informal sector does not engage in formal banking relationships. It does not have a credit relationship that it can refinance. It does not have the same sort of documentation and the same level of formalization that the government can directly reach out to. So I think looking at what some of the other countries which have similarly high levels of informality, so-called informality in terms of their economy, we're looking at some of the lessons that that they've applied. One, for example, thing that they can do is utility bill deferment, right? So one of the highest fixed costs that most informal sector firms have is the amount of money they spend on electricity and natural gas. So maybe the government has to look at, interesting enough, we have good data on the number of commercial electricity connections that exist, right? So this would at least mean that you're catering to some section of the informal sector, in particular those who are engaged in retail wholesale trade, someone who runs, like a motor workshop, someone who runs a small restaurant, someone who runs a wholesale establishment of some sort. If you provide them with utility bill relief at this time period, it might be very useful. It might actually help them mitigate some of the adverse impact that they're experiencing. Another possible intervention could be to provide some form of rent relief. Now, I know this is much harder to program and to implement in some form, but rent relief has been floated as an idea in several other countries as well, because again, rent is a particularly sort of high sort of cost that is incurred especially by businesses who work in, say, for example, storage or transportation services, or who work in, again, wholesale and retail trade. So maybe working out some agreement where rent payments can be deferred, or the government could provide them with easy loans at very low markup or interest-free loans that can help mitigate these particular interventions. And then finally, the third one, which we've been thinking about and is something that I think really we need to be creative about, is how do you ensure that people who are employed within the informal economy, how do you reach out to them beyond just the measures that you're taking with BISP and the SR Kafalat program? So they've said that they want to reach out to 10 million households, almost we're looking at almost 1/3 of the entire country. But we really need to be very creative in terms of how do we target those particular populations that are not stationary, right? So, for example, urban migrants who work in big cities provide all sorts of services. They can be, food cart vendors. They provide other sorts of services, like someone's an electrician, a plumber. These people do not have fixed establishments. They don't have shops that the government can just visit and document. We need to be able to come up with really creative solutions in targeting these particular populations as well. And I think I don't have an easy answer to this. I don't have a solution to this. But I think the government really needs to start thinking about how do you get to these particular populations as well. So yeah, so all in all, I think there are these three types of support mechanisms that we're looking at. Utility bill deferment would be one major one major intervention that the government can undertake. Secondly, finding some sort of rental relief or land cost related relief that you can pass on as well. Possibly link it with some sort of microcredit initiative at low or 0% markup. And then the third is how do you target laborers that are employed within the informal economy. And I think those are the three areas in which I think the government also needs to think about.
Yes, that is very appropriate. That is somehow you have given the way forward as well. I would want you to comment on something that how can we, reach these people? It is, sometimes it gets difficult. The plumbers and the people who have such small shops in the area, and they don't want to go and ask for the, the the relief packages, and like they do want it, but they have no way to reach it. So,
Yeah.
how can we reach those people?
I think there would be a lot of. I think it requires a lot of social, organizational, and administrative effort on part of the state, right? I mean, we need to. So one way that has been suggested is to look at consumption of electricity as a possible proxy through which you can target vulnerable populations, right? So about 80% of the population has access to electricity in this country, give or take. We know that there are about 6 million commercial connections of electricity out there as well. We know that those 6 million, we have electricity consumption data for those 6 million commercial sectors, for those commercial customers. And so we can create some sort of a stratification, which we say, okay, the people who are at the bottom of those commercial users, we can probably target them because we have some sort of data on them. As far as urban laborers and migrants are concerned, I think that's a problem that the government would have to be very creative with. And one solution that they propose, which I think might actually work, is how do you reach that you might be able to reach them through some sort of mobile technology initiative, right? So you use the telcos to send out SMSs to ask people who would like to enroll themselves for some relief program, to make sure that they provide some sort of information. They can provide a CNIC number that you can then verify using NADRA's initiative, which I think what the government is currently planning on doing. And then I think the third step would be to ensure that your district administration, the bureaucratic capacity that the state has at the local level, is brought in to sort of reach out to these people. I also think that political parties in particular and the government would have to take up some sort of, would have to participate in that effort in some way as well, but because local politicians are often quite well aware of what's happening within their constituency. They often know which, because they normally canvass votes and they come into contact with voters around the time of elections. I think that's a particular resource that can be mobilized. Now, it has its own problems. Obviously, it will have its own implications. There will be targeting issues. There will be exclusion and inclusion errors. But we're at a stage and the crisis is of a severity of a particular type that we might have to sort of be a little more. We might have to be a little more blunt in the solutions that we apply. We can't wait for the perfect solution to come up so that we don't have exclusion or inclusion errors, and we need to reach out to as many people as possible. And I think here the political as well as bureaucratic capacity of the government will probably be quite useful.
Yeah, we'll definitely try to so that this thing just goes to government and they try to take some good initiatives to cater this. Thank you so very much, sir, for your time. We are really thankful. Thank you, sir.